When Elvis Presley walked onto the stage on August 16, 1977, nobody knew they were about to witness something that would change the world forever. The king of rock and roll stood under the bright lights in his white jumpsuit, grabbed the microphone, and opened his mouth to sing his most famous song. But then something impossible happened. Elvis Presley forgot the lyrics. His mouth moved, but no words came out. 15,000 people gasped at the same time. The band stopped playing. And then, right there in front of everyone, the greatest performer in the world collapsed onto the stage. What happened next didn't just save Elvis's life. It planted a seed that would take 48 years to bloom into a miracle that touched millions of people around the world. This is the true story of one night when everything went wrong and became more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The velvet seat felt scratchy against Maggie Chen's bare legs, but she didn't dare complain. Not tonight. Not when Grandma Delphine had spent every dollar from the old cookie jar to buy these tickets. The cookie jar that usually held emergency money for when the bakery's oven broke down or the roof started leaking again. "Front row, baby girl," Grandma Delphine whispered, squeezing Maggie's small hand with her thin, papery fingers. "When you're my age, you'll tell your grandbabies you sat this close to the king himself." Maggie wanted to believe her. She wanted to imagine herself old and wrinkled, talking about tonight. But she'd heard the doctor's words last Tuesday, even though Grandma thought she'd been sleeping in the waiting room chair. 3 weeks. Maybe 4, if they were lucky. The Memphis Civic Center buzzed with electricity. Women wore their fanciest dresses. Men had slicked their hair back with shiny gel. Everyone clutched their programs like golden tickets. Maggie counted the rows behind them, 23 rows of people who couldn't see as well as they could. Front row. Center. The best seats in the entire building. "Is he really as handsome as in the pictures?" Maggie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She'd learned that asking questions kept Grandma from noticing when she was scared. Grandma Delphine's eyes sparkled, and for just a moment she didn't look sick anymore. "Oh, honey, the pictures don't capture even half of it. I saw him back in 1956 when I was just a young thing. He walked onto that stage and the whole world tilted sideways. That's the only way I can describe it, like gravity itself changed direction." The lights began to dim. The crowd roared so loud that Maggie felt it in her chest, like thunder during a summer storm. She grabbed Grandma's hand tighter. The curtain rose slowly, dramatically. Smoke machines created clouds across the stage. Blue and purple lights cut through the fog. Then from behind the mist, he appeared. Elvis Presley. The white jumpsuit caught every spotlight. Rhinestones sparkled like captured stars. His black hair swept back perfectly. But as he walked closer to the microphone, Maggie noticed something the screaming crowd didn't seem to see. His face looked pale, not like someone who'd forgotten their stage makeup, but like someone who was using all their strength just to stand up straight. Grandma Delphine leaned forward in her seat, and Maggie heard her breath catch. "Something's wrong," Grandma whispered. Elvis wrapped his fingers around the microphone stand. The arena fell silent, waiting. He opened his mouth to sing, and the first notes came out strong and clear. The crowd erupted again. Maggie felt herself relax slightly, but then, halfway through the verse, Elvis stopped. His mouth kept moving, but no sound came out. His eyes went wide, confused. He looked down at the microphone like it had betrayed him. The band kept playing for 3 more beats before they realized what was happening and stopped. The music dying in awkward, scattered notes. 15,000 people held their breath at exactly the same moment. Elvis Presley, the man who'd sung thousands of songs in front of millions of people, the king of rock and roll himself, had forgotten his own lyrics. "No," Grandma Delphine breathed beside Maggie. "No, not like this." Maggie watched Elvis's face transform from confusion to something that looked like panic. He gripped the microphone stand harder, his knuckles turning white. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong, crooked and scared. "I'm sorry, folks," he said, his voice cracking. "I seem to have lost my place for a moment. Just give—" He didn't finish the sentence. Elvis's knees buckled. His hand slipped from the microphone stand. The king of rock and roll collapsed onto the stage with a heavy thud that echoed through the sound system. The crowd gasped as one enormous creature. Someone screamed. The curtain began dropping frantically, stagehands rushing from the wings. Maggie felt her grandmother clutch her chest, both hands pressed against her heart. "No, not yet," Grandma Delphine whispered, her voice thin and desperate. "He has to finish. We all have to finish." The lights came up bright and harsh, destroying the magic. Around them, people were crying, shouting, demanding to know what happened. But Maggie couldn't look away from her grandmother's face, pale as moonlight, eyes fixed on that closed curtain, waiting for an ending that hadn't come. Backstage was chaos. Security guards shouted into walkie-talkies. Dancers in sequined costumes pressed against walls, crying into their hands. The band members stood frozen, instruments still in their grips, staring at the spot where Elvis had fallen. 2 paramedics rushed past, carrying a stretcher, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Elvis's manager, a short man with sweat pouring down his face, grabbed one of them by the arm. "Is he breathing? Tell me he's breathing." "Sir, please step back. We need room to work." Behind a stack of amplifiers, hidden in shadows where nobody thought to look, a boy watched everything unfold. His name was Jasper Vaughan, though nobody had called him by his full name in so long that sometimes he forgot it himself. Most days he was just that kid, or "Hey you," or nothing at all. Jasper had been living in the Memphis Civic Center for exactly 63 days. He'd found a storage room in the basement where old props were kept, fake trees from a Christmas show, boxes of broken lights, rolled up carpets that smelled like dust and secrets. He'd made a bed from costume fabric and survived on popcorn and hot dogs he took from the concession stands after closing time, always careful to take only enough that nobody would notice. He was 12 years old and had nowhere else to go. The children's home had been his third one. Each place had been worse than the last. Kids who hit, adults who didn't care, rooms that felt like prisons. So 2 months ago, during a field trip to see a musical, Jasper had simply walked away from the group and never walked back. The Civic Center became his castle, his hiding place, his whole world. And now Elvis Presley was dying right in front of him. Jasper couldn't explain what happened next. Something inside him, something that had been quiet and scared for so long, suddenly woke up and got loud. He stepped out from behind the amplifiers. "Excuse me," he said, but his voice was too soft. Nobody heard him over the chaos. He walked closer, past the band members, past the crying dancers. A security guard spotted him and reached out to grab his arm. "Kid, you can't be back here." "How did—" Jasper ducked under the guard's reach and ran. His bare feet, he'd worn through his only pair of shoes weeks ago, slapped against the cold floor. He ran straight toward the circle of people surrounding Elvis. "Stop that, kid!" someone yelled. But Jasper was fast. Living on the streets taught you to be fast or go hungry. He slipped between 2 paramedics and dropped to his knees beside Elvis Presley. Up close, the king looked small and human and scared. His eyes were half open, unfocused. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. The rhinestones on his jumpsuit caught the harsh backstage lights and threw tiny rainbows across his pale face. Jasper did the only thing he knew how to do. The only thing that had ever made him feel less alone during the 63 days of hiding. During the years before that, in places where nobody wanted him, he sang. Not loudly, not like a performance, just soft and clear, like singing a lullaby to someone who needed it. He sang the exact lyrics Elvis had forgotten, the words about love and longing and holding on when everything feels impossible. The chaos around them began to fade. One by one, people stopped shouting. The manager stopped pacing. The band members lowered their instrument. Everyone in that backstage area turned to stare at this barefoot boy with tangled hair and clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, singing like his heart was breaking. And Elvis's eyes focused. His hand moved slightly, fingers twitching toward the sound of Jasper's voice. His breathing steadied, deepened. Color began returning to his cheeks. When Jasper finished the verse, the last note hanging in the air like a prayer, Elvis whispered, "Who are you?" Jasper looked down at this famous man, this legend, this king who'd forgotten his own song. He saw something in Elvis's eyes that he recognized, the look of someone who was tired of pretending everything was okay. "Someone who needs you to get back up," Jasper said quietly. "Just like you got back up in..." Elvis stared at him. The 1968 comeback special. The moment when everyone thought Elvis was finished, washed up, forgotten, and he'd proven them all wrong. How did this strange boy know about that? How did he know exactly what to say? The lead paramedic touched Jasper's shoulder gently. "Son, we need to examine him now." But Elvis grabbed Jasper's wrist with surprising strength. "Wait," he looked at the paramedic. "I'm fine. I just need a minute. Just 1 minute. Mr. Presley, you collapsed on stage. You need to go to the hospital. I need to finish the show." Everyone started talking at once. "Impossible. Too dangerous. Think of your health." The crowd would understand. But Elvis wasn't listening to any of them. He was still looking at Jasper, and Jasper was looking back, and something passed between them that needed no words. Elvis sat up slowly, waving away the hands that reached to help him. He got to his feet, wobbling slightly, then standing firm. He looked at his manager, at the band, at all the worried faces surrounding him. "The show goes on in 30 minutes, Elvis announced. His voice was stronger now, clearer. "But there's one condition." Everyone waited. Elvis put his hand on Jasper's shoulder. "The boy sings with me." The manager exploded. "Elvis, we don't even know who this kid is. We can't just..." "Those are my terms," Elvis said calmly. "We perform together, or we don't perform at all." Jasper's heart hammered against his ribs. Sing? On stage? In front of 15,000 people? He'd never sung for anyone before except himself in the darkness of the storage room. He'd never even had a real music lesson. "I can't," Jasper whispered. "I don't know how." Elvis knelt down so they were eye to eye. "You just did. You knew exactly what to do when I couldn't remember. That's the only kind of knowing that matters." Before anyone could argue further, a commotion erupted near the stage door. A security guard was helping someone through the crowd. No, carrying someone. A woman. Old and frail. Her face twisted in pain. Behind her, a little girl with black hair in 2 braids was crying. "Please," the girl begged. "Please, someone help my grandma. She can't breathe right. Something's wrong with her heart." Elvis stood up straight, and Jasper saw his face change. The king of rock and roll looked at that old woman and that scared little girl, and something in his expression cracked open, something raw and real and full of old grief. "Bring her to the medical room," Elvis commanded. Now, as they carried the woman past, she opened her eyes for just a moment. They landed on Elvis, then on the boy beside him. Her cracked lips moved, forming words so quiet that only Jasper heard them. "Not yet. The story isn't finished yet." Franklin Pierce stood in the hallway outside the medical room, his back pressed against the cold concrete wall, listening to the little girl sob. He'd been the one to spot her in the crowd, a small figure jumping up and down, waving her arms frantically, while everyone else stood frozen in shock after Elvis collapsed. He'd seen the elderly woman slumped in her seat, and something in his chest had twisted tight. 20 years of working security at the Memphis Civic Center, and Franklin had learned to spot trouble before it bloomed. But he'd also learned to spot something else: people who were running out of time. Through the small window in the medical room door, he watched the arena nurse check the old woman's pulse, her blood pressure, listen to her heart with a stethoscope. The little girl Maggie, she'd said her name was Maggie, stood beside the cot, holding her grandmother's hand so tight her knuckles had gone white. Franklin touched his own face without thinking, fingers tracing the thick scars that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. The scars that made children stare and adults look away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen. The scars that had ended his music career before it really began. The medical room door opened. The nurse stepped out, her expression carefully neutral, the look medical people wore when the news was bad, but they had to stay professional. "Are you family?" she asked Franklin. "No, ma'am. Just security. I brought them here." The nurse glanced back at the closed door, then lowered her voice. "Her heart is failing faster than expected. The granddaughter mentioned she's terminal cancer. The doctors gave her 3 weeks." She paused. "I don't think she has 3 weeks. The stress of tonight, the excitement, I'm not sure she'll make it through the night." Franklin felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Does the girl know?" "Not yet. I'll tell her in a moment. I just needed—" The nurse's professional mask slipped for a second, showing the tired woman underneath. "I needed a minute. She's so young. 11 years old and about to lose everything." The nurse went back inside. Franklin stayed where he was, frozen between leaving and staying. He should get back to his post. There were other doors to guard, other emergencies that might happen, but his feet wouldn't move. Through the door he heard the nurse's gentle voice explaining. He heard Maggie's sharp intake of breath, the way she tried not to cry, tried to be brave. He heard her grandmother's weak voice saying, "It's okay, baby girl, it's okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. Franklin made a decision that surprised even himself. He opened the door and walked inside. The medical room was small, just a cot, a chair, some basic medical equipment. It smelled like antiseptic and fear. Delphine lay on the cot, her breathing shallow and labored. Maggie sat in the chair, pulled close to the bedside, tears streaming down her face. They both looked up when Franklin entered. Maggie's eyes widened when she saw his scars. He waited for the usual reaction, the flinch, the quick look away. But instead she just stared at him with those tear-filled eyes. "Wait, I'm Franklin," he said quietly. "I'm the one who brought you here." "Thank you," Maggie whispered. Delphine's eyes focused on him with unexpected sharpness. Despite her failing body, there was something fierce and knowing in that gaze. "You work here?" she asked, a voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Security. But you used to play music." It wasn't a question. Franklin's hand went to his face again, touching the scars. How did she know? He hadn't played music in 20 years. He hadn't even told anyone at the Civic Center about his past. He was just Franklin, the security guard with the scarred face, the man who watched doors and checked tickets and stayed invisible. "A long time ago," he admitted. Delphine tried to sit up slightly. The nurse moved to stop her, but the old woman waved her away with surprising strength. "I can see it in your hands. The way you hold them. Musicians never forget." Maggie looked at Franklin's hands, then back at his face. "Will you stay?" she asked suddenly. "I need to go back and watch the concert. For Grandma. She needs to know how it ends, but I don't want her to be alone. Maggie, sweetheart. I'll be fine, Delphine protested weakly. No, Maggie's voice cracked. You made me promise. You said I had to watch for both of us. You said I had to tell you every detail. She looked at Franklin with desperate eyes. Please, can you stay with her? Can you tell her what happens? Franklin should say no. This wasn't his job. He had responsibilities, other places to be. But he found himself nodding. I have a radio, he said, pulling the small backstage radio from his belt. All the security guards carried them to coordinate during events. It picks up the sound feed from the stage. I can stay here and describe everything. Relief flooded Maggie's face. She leaned over and kissed her grandmother's forehead. I'll remember everything. Every single thing. And Mr. Franklin will tell you all about it until I get back. Go on, baby girl, Delphine whispered. Don't miss a moment. Maggie ran from the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The nurse excused herself to check on supplies, leaving Franklin alone with the dying woman. We pulled the chair closer to the cot and sat down, holding the radio between them. The backstage chatter crackled through, people arguing about whether Elvis should really perform, worried voices discussing the strange barefoot boy. You knew him, didn't you? Delphine said softly. Elvis. Franklin's head snapped up. How? I can see it in your eyes. The way you looked when they carried me past him backstage. That wasn't the look of a fan seeing a celebrity. That was the look of someone seeing an old friend. She paused, breathing hard. Or someone who used to be a friend. Franklin stared at this dying woman who saw too much. His hands began to shake. He pressed them against his knees, trying to make them stop. His piano player, Franklin finally said. Before he got really famous. Before the movies and Vegas and all of it. Back when it was just a group of us in a van, driving from show to show, sleeping in cheap motels, living on dreams and hamburgers. What happened? The question was simple, but the answer was 20 years of silence, 20 years of hiding. Franklin touched his scars again. It had become a habit, a nervous gesture he couldn't control. There was an accident during rehearsal. A lighting rig fell. I was alone in the venue, practicing a new arrangement. The rig came down and he gestured to his face. The doctors saved my life, but not my face. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I saw a monster. I couldn't imagine standing on stage like this, with people staring, pointing, whispering. So you disappeared, Delphine said. So I disappeared, Franklin confirmed. I never said goodbye, never told Elvis where I went or why. I just vanished. Found a job here where I could still be close to music, but never have to perform again. Never have to be seen. Delphine was quiet for a long moment. The radio crackled with an announcement. The show would resume in 15 minutes. He looked for you, she said finally. Franklin's head jerked up. What? Elvis. I heard the stories. After you disappeared, he spent months trying to find you. Called every hospital, every police station. He blamed himself, they said. Thought he'd somehow failed you, driven you away. Delphine's eyes locked onto his. You didn't just hide from the world, Franklin. You hid from the person who needed to know you were okay. The words hit Franklin like a physical blow. All these years, he'd told himself he was being merciful, that Elvis was better off without him, that his scarred face would only be a reminder of tragedy, that he was saving his old friend from the burden of pity. But maybe he'd been saving himself. Saving himself from being vulnerable, from being seen, from the possibility that people might look at his scars and see only a victim instead of the musician he used to be. The radio crackled to life with Elvis's voice, clearer now, stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, the show will go on. But first, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you about someone I lost a long time ago. Someone I should have fought harder to find." Franklin's hands stopped shaking. His breath caught in his throat. "His name was Franklin Pierce," Elvis continued over the radio, his voice carrying to the 15,000 people in the arena and to this small medical room where a dying woman and a broken man sat listening. He was the best piano player I ever knew, not because his technique was perfect, though it was pretty damn good, but because he played like he understood that music was about making people feel less alone. Franklin felt tears burning behind his eyes. Beside him, Delphine reached out and placed her frail hand on his scarred one. "The night Franklin disappeared," Elvis said, "I was supposed to be at rehearsal with him, but I was tired, overwhelmed, dealing with my own problems. I cancelled. I left him there alone. And when the accident happened, when that lighting rig fell and changed his life forever, I wasn't there. I failed him. And then he was gone, and I never got to tell him I was sorry. Never got to tell him that what happened to his face didn't change what was in his heart. Didn't change that he was my brother." The arena was completely silent. 15,000 people listening to a confession. "Franklin," Elvis said, his voice breaking, "if you're out there somewhere listening, I've missed you every day for 20 years, and I need you now. I need you to come back. Not for me, for everyone in this arena who needs to remember that we're all broken in some way, and that's exactly what makes us beautiful." Delphine squeezed Franklin's hand. "The story isn't finished yet," she whispered, echoing her earlier words. "Your story, his story. It's all connected, Franklin, and you're the only one who can finish it." Franklin stood up, his legs unsteady, his heart hammered in his chest. 20 years. 20 years of hiding, of silence, of convincing himself he was doing the right thing.
"I can't," he said. "I haven't played in 2 decades. I don't even know if I remember how. And my face, everyone will stare. Everyone will see."
"Everyone will see a man who survived," Delphine interrupted, a voice surprisingly strong. "Everyone will see someone brave enough to step back into the light." She paused, breathing hard. "Maybe we're all broken. That's not what matters. What matters is what we do with our last chances, what we do when the music calls us home." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, like a dare, like a final gift from a dying woman to a man who'd been dead inside for 20 years. Franklin looked down at his hands, the hands that used to create magic on piano keys, the hands that had been silent for so long they'd almost forgotten their purpose. He made his choice. "I need you to stay here," he told Delphine. "The nurse will be back any minute. You rest and you listen to that radio and you hold on. Because I'm about to do something terrifying, and I need to know you're going to be here to find out how it ends." Delphine smiled, and for a moment, the light in her eyes pushed back the shadow of death. "I'll be here. I promise. Now go. Go make music that reminds people why their hearts are still beating." Franklin ran. Franklin's work boots pounded against the concrete floor as he ran through the backstage corridors. His security badge bounced against his chest. His scarred face, the face he'd hidden for 20 years, was about to be seen by 15,000 people. He burst through the stage door and collided with a wall of sound. The crowd was chanting, "Elvis, Elvis, Elvis." The rhythm of it shook the building's foundations. Above the stage, the massive curtain was still down, but Franklin could see shadows moving behind it, stagehands rushing, band members tuning instruments, dancers stretching in nervous preparation. A security supervisor spotted him. "Franklin, where the hell have you been? We need everyone at their posts. I need to get backstage. Now." The supervisor looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You are backstage. Get to section C." No, I need to see Elvis. Nobody sees Elvis right now except his manager. Franklin didn't wait for permission. He pushed past the supervisor and headed toward the dressing rooms. Behind him he heard shouting, footsteps chasing him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, he'd lose his courage. If he stopped, he'd remember all the reasons he'd stayed hidden for 2 decades. He reached Elvis's dressing room just as the door opened. Elvis stood there, freshly changed into a new jumpsuit, this one midnight blue with silver trim. The pale, collapsed man from 30 minutes ago had been replaced by someone who looked determined, focused. Next to him stood the barefoot boy Jasper, looking terrified and brave at the same time. Elvis's eyes met Franklin's across the corridor. Time stopped. 20 years of silence hung between them. 20 years of guilt and grief and words that should have been said. Franklin's hand moved to his scars, that old nervous habit, but then he forced it back down to his side. Franklin. Elvis breathed the name like a prayer, like a question, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I heard you, Franklin said, his voice rough. On the radio. I heard what you said. Elvis took a step forward, then another. The people around them, the manager, the stagehands, the security guards who chased Franklin, all faded into background noise. There were only 2 old friends, finally in the same space after 20 years of absence. Your face, Elvis said softly, reaching out but not quite touching. All this time, I didn't know. I didn't know what happened to you. I was ashamed, Franklin admitted. The truth felt like broken glass in his throat. I thought you'd be better off without me. Without looking at these scars and remembering what went wrong.
Idiot, Elvis said, and then he pulled Franklin into a hug so tight that Franklin forgot how to breathe. You beautiful, stubborn idiot. I never cared about your face. I cared about you.
Franklin felt something break open inside his chest. Something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He hugged Elvis back, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt like maybe he wasn't a monster after all. When they finally pulled apart, Elvis kept one hand on Franklin's shoulder, like he was afraid Franklin might disappear again. I need you to play for me tonight, Elvis said. The way you used to. Can you do that? Franklin's hands started shaking again. I haven't played in. I know, but you heard me out there. I told them you were coming. I told 15,000 people that my old friend was going to come back. So you've got 2 choices. Prove me a liar or prove me a prophet. Young Jasper stepped forward, looking up at Franklin with those 2 old eyes, the eyes of a kid who'd seen too much, survived too much. The piano's waiting, Jasper said quietly. I checked. It's a beautiful one, black and shiny. It looks lonely, like it's been waiting for the right person to play it. Franklin looked at this strange boy who somehow knew exactly what to say. You're the one who sang when Elvis forgot the lyrics. Jasper nodded. Then you know how it feels. To be terrified, to think you can't do something and then do it anyway. I'm still terrified, Jasper admitted. But I'm going to do it anyway. We both are. Elvis's manager pushed through the crowd, his face red and sweaty. Elvis, we have 5 minutes. The crowd is getting restless. We need to book. He stopped when he saw Franklin. Who is this? This, Elvis said with a smile that lit up his whole face, is the reason tonight is going to be legendary instead of tragic. This is Franklin Pierce. Get him a shirt that fits. Get the boy some shoes that don't have holes. And tell the band we're changing the entire set list. Changing the Elvis we rehearsed. We have arrangements. We can't just... We're not performing tonight, Elvis interrupted calmly. We're telling a story, and stories don't follow a script. 10 minutes later, the curtain rose for the second time that night. The crowd's roar was deafening. People were on their feet, crying, cheering, shouting Elvis's name. They'd waited through uncertainty and fear, not knowing if their king would return. And he did return, but not alone. Elvis walked out holding Jasper's hand. Behind them, Franklin sat at the grand piano, his scarred face visible to everyone. The arena's massive screens showed his image, the thick scars running down the left side of his face, the nervous set of his jaw, his hands hovering over the keys like they were greeting old friends. The crowd's cheering faltered slightly. People leaned forward, confused. Who was the boy? Who was the scarred man at the piano? This wasn't the show they'd expected. Elvis raised his hand, and silence fell like snow. "I need to tell you what happened tonight," Elvis began, his voice steady and clear. "I walked onto this stage like I've done 1,000 times before, and I forgot. I forgot the words to a song I've sung for years. I forgot because..." His voice caught. "Because I've been forgetting a lot of things lately. Important things." The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. "I've been forgetting to take care of myself. Forgetting why I fell in love with music in the first place. Forgetting that being a king doesn't mean being perfect. It means being honest. It means showing up even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." Maggie sat in her front row seat, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She thought about Grandma Delphine in that medical room, listening through Franklin's radio, fighting to stay alive long enough to hear how this story ended. "This young man," Elvis continued, gesturing to Jasper. "His name is Jasper. He saved my life tonight. Not with medicine or doctors, with music. When I couldn't remember my own song, he sang it for me. He reminded me what music is supposed to do, make people feel less alone." Jasper's face turned red. He stared at his new shoes, leather boots that were a little too big, but better than anything he'd owned in months. "And this man at the piano," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, "is Franklin Pierce. He was my piano player 20 years ago, before fame got too big and life got too complicated. He had an accident that scarred his face, and he disappeared because he thought his scars made him less than what he was. But he was wrong. Franklin, you were always more than your face. You were the heart of the music." Franklin's hands trembled over the keys. Through the bright stage lights he could see faces in the crowd, some curious, some moved, some waiting to see if this strange night would become something beautiful or fall apart completely. "So tonight," Elvis said, "we're going to do something different. We're not going to put on a show. We're going to share something real, something imperfect, something that might fall apart at any moment, and that's exactly why it matters." He nodded to Franklin. Franklin took a deep breath. His fingers touched the keys, cold and smooth and familiar, like coming home after a long, painful journey. He played a single note, then another, then a chord that resonated through the entire arena. The music that came from his hands wasn't technically perfect. There were small stumbles, moments where his fingers didn't quite hit the right keys, but there was something in that imperfection that was more beautiful than any flawless performance could be. It was honest. It was vulnerable. It was the sound of a man finding himself again after 20 years of being lost. Elvis began to sing, not the song he'd forgotten earlier, but something slower, deeper. A song about losing your way and finding it again. A song about people who slip through the cracks and climb back out. A song about scars that tell stories instead of hiding them. Jasper joined in with his untrained voice, pure and aching and full of every lonely night he'd spent in that basement storage room. His voice cracked on the high notes, but nobody cared. The cracks made it more real. In the front row, Maggie cried. Not sad tears, something else, something that felt like watching a miracle happen in real time. Throughout the arena, Something extraordinary began to happen. A woman in row 12 stood up. She was wearing a scarf wrapped around her head, clearly undergoing chemotherapy. She removed the scarf slowly, revealing her bald head to everyone around her. She raised her arms and swayed to the music. A man in row 7 took off his prosthetic leg and held it up high, not in shame but in defiance, proof that he'd survived whatever took his leg in the first place. A teenage girl unbuttoned the top of her shirt slightly, showing the edge of a large birthmark that covered her neck and chest, something she'd hidden under high collars her entire life. All around the arena, people began showing their scars, their differences, their beautiful broken pieces, and instead of staring with judgment, people looked at each other with recognition, with compassion, with the sudden understanding that everyone was fighting battles nobody else could see. Elvis watched it happen from the stage, tears streaming down his face. He'd performed for millions of people over the years, but he'd never felt anything like this sense of collective healing, of shared vulnerability. Franklin played with his whole heart, his scarred face illuminated by spotlights, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel like a monster. He felt like a musician. Jasper sang like every note might be his last chance to be heard, and in a way, it was. Tomorrow, Elvis would find him a home, a family, a future. But tonight, he was just a boy whose voice mattered. The song built and built, wave after wave of music washing over the crowd, piano and voice and harmony, all weaving together into something that transcended performance and became prayer. In the medical room, Delphine listened through the crackling radio, her failing heart somehow finding the strength to keep beating. The nurse stood beside her, tears running down her professional face, abandoned completely to this moment. "Do you hear it?" Delphine whispered. "That's the sound of people remembering they're alive." The song reached its crescendo, Franklin's hands flying across the keys, Elvis's voice soaring, Jasper's pure tone cutting through everything like light through darkness. The audience sang too, 15,000 voices joining together, not worrying about being in tune or knowing all the words, just adding their sound to the collective story. And then, as the final chord faded into silence, Elvis did something unexpected. He stopped singing. He looked directly at the camera crew that had been filming the entire concert, the footage that would be stored in television archives, preserved but mostly forgotten until someone discovered it decades later. "What happened here tonight needs to reach further than these walls," Elvis said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "This moment needs to live forever, not as entertainment, as proof. Proof that broken people can make beautiful things. Proof that the end of one story is just the beginning of another." He paused, and Maggie felt like he was looking directly at her. "I'm making a promise right now," Elvis continued, "to everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone who will hear about this night in the years to come. This footage, this concert, this moment, I'm donating it all to public television. Free for anyone who needs to see it. Free for anyone who's forgotten their lyrics. Free for anyone who thinks their scars make them invisible." The crowd erupted in applause, but Elvis raised his hand for silence one more time. "But there's one more thing I need to do before this night ends." He looked out into the audience, scanning faces until he found what he was looking for. "There's a girl in the front row, Maggie Chen. Stand up, sweetheart." Maggie's legs felt like water as she stood up. Every eye in the Memphis Civic Center turned toward her, 15,000 people staring at an 11-year-old girl in a wrinkled dress who'd been crying for the past hour. The spotlight found her, and she had to shield her eyes against the brightness. Her heart hammered so hard she thought everyone in the arena could probably hear it. "Come here, honey," Elvis said gently, gesturing toward the stage. Maggie shook her head. She couldn't move. Her feet were glued to the floor. What if she tripped? What if she said something stupid? What if... But then she thought about Grandma Delphine lying in that medical room, fighting to stay alive long enough to hear how this ended. She thought about the promise she'd made to watch everything, remember everything, be brave enough for both of them. She took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted like a sea, people moving aside to create a path. Some reached out to touch her shoulder gently as she passed, offering silent encouragement. An usher appeared to help her up the stage steps, and suddenly Maggie was standing on the same stage as Elvis Presley, under lights so bright they made her dizzy. Elvis knelt down so they were eye to eye. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the sweat on his forehead, the kindness in his face that the photographs never quite captured. "What's your grandmother's name?" he asked softly, though his microphone carried the words to everyone. "Delphine," Maggie whispered. Then louder, "Delphine Chen, and she came here tonight to see me perform." Maggie nodded. She saved every penny from her bakery. She bought front row tickets because... Her voice broke. "Because she's dying. The doctors said 3 weeks. She wanted to see you one more time before..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too big, too terrible, too final. Elvis's eyes filled with tears. He looked out at the audience, and when he spoke, his voice carried every ounce of pain and beauty that made him legendary. "My mama died when I was 23 years old," he said. "I was away at the time. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to hold her hand one last. I didn't get to tell her all the things I should have said when I had the chance." He paused, wiping his eyes. "That loss, it changed me. It's followed me every day since. Sometimes I think everything I've done, every song I've sung, has been trying to say the things I never got to tell her." The arena was so quiet that Maggie could hear her own breathing. "Delphine is in the medical room right now," Elvis continued. "Her heart is failing. She might not make it through the night. But she stayed because she needed to see how this story ended." He looked at Maggie. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. She's fighting to witness one more beautiful moment before she goes." Franklin, still sitting at the piano, played soft, gentle chords underneath Elvis's words, a musical heartbeat that held everyone together. "So here's what we're going to do," Elvis said, standing up and taking Maggie's hand. "We're not going to make Delphine wait any longer. We're not going to make her listen through a crackling radio. We're going to go to her, right now. All of us." The crowd gasped. "Leave the stage? Stop the concert?" But Elvis was already moving, leading Maggie toward the stage exit. Franklin stood from the piano. Jasper followed close behind. "You all wait right here," Elvis called to the audience. "We'll be back. But first, I have to keep a promise I made to myself a long time ago, that I'd never let anyone die without knowing they mattered, without knowing their story was seen." The walk through the backstage corridors felt like a dream. Maggie held Elvis's hand on one side, while Jasper walked on her other side. Behind them, Franklin followed, and then the camera crew, because Elvis had insisted they capture everything. They reached the medical room. Through the small window, Maggie could see her grandmother lying on the cot, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The nurse sat beside her, still holding the radio even though it had gone silent when Elvis left the stage. Elvis knocked softly on the door before opening it. The nurse looked up in shock. Her mouth fell open. She started to stand, to say something about too many visitors, about the patient needing rest. But the words died when she saw Elvis's face, saw the determination and love there. Delphine's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked confused, like she thought she might be dreaming or dying, or both. Then her gaze focused on Elvis standing in the doorway, and her entire face transformed. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You waited for me," Elvis replied, moving to her bedside. "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." He sat on the edge of the cot exactly like he'd sat on thousands of stages, except this audience was just one dying woman and her granddaughter. Franklin moved to stand near the wall, his scarred face gentle with understanding. Jasper stayed close to Maggie, and she was grateful. This boy she'd never met before tonight somehow made her feel less alone. "I can't play a full concert for you," Elvis said to Delphine, "but I can give you something better, something private, something just for you." "I don't need a concert," Delphine said, her breathing labored. "I just needed to see broken people make something beautiful. I needed to know the world still has magic in it before I leave it behind." "The world has magic because people like you are in it," Elvis told her. He took her frail hand in his. "People who save every penny to see one more show. People who fight to witness one more moment of beauty. You're the magic, Delphine. People like you are the reason any of this matters." Tears ran down Delphine's wrinkled cheeks. Maggie moved to her other side, taking her grandmother's free hand. "Sing for her," Maggie said to Elvis. Her voice was small but fierce. "Please, one song. Just for her." Elvis looked at Franklin and nodded. There was no piano in the medical room, but Franklin didn't need one. He began to hum, a low, resonant sound that filled the small space with warmth. It was the same melody he'd played on stage, but softer now, more intimate. Elvis began to sing. Not loud and showy like his famous performances. Quiet, tender, like singing a lullaby to someone precious. The words were about love and letting go, and how the people we lose never really leave us. They live on in every beautiful thing we see, every kind thing we do, every moment we choose light over darkness. Jasper joined in, his young voice blending with Elvis's legendary one. Together they created something that wasn't about fame or performance or impressing anyone. It was pure gift, music given freely to someone who needed it desperately. Maggie watched her grandmother's face as they sang. Delphine's breathing steadied slightly. Her eyes stayed open, clear and present, drinking in every note like water after a long drought. The pain lines around her mouth softened. The nurse in the corner cried silently, not even trying to hide it anymore. When the song ended, the small room felt full of something bigger than all of them, something that made death seem less like an ending and more like a transformation. Delphine squeezed both Elvis's and Maggie's hands with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me what I needed to see. Thank you for proving that people still show up for each other. That's all that matters in the end. Who showed up, who stayed, who chose love even when it was hard." Elvis leaned down and kissed her forehead, just like he might have kissed his own mother if he'd had the chance to say goodbye. "Say, you fought so hard to be here tonight. That means you're not done fighting. You're going to see tomorrow, Delphine. I know it." Delphine smiled, but it was the smile of someone who knew better, someone who'd made peace with what was coming. "Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I saw what I needed to see. I saw broken people make something beautiful. That's enough. That's everything." She turned her head to look at Maggie. "You remember this, baby girl. You remember that the most beautiful moments come from the broken places. You remember that showing up matters more than being perfect. You remember..." She paused, breathing hard. "You remember that love is always worth fighting for, right up until the very end." "I'll remember," Maggie promised, even though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. "I'll remember everything." Delphine's eyes moved to Franklin, standing against the wall with his scarred face. "And you, musician who forgot he was a musician, you keep playing. You keep letting people see those scars, because every time someone sees them and you play anyway, you give permission for other people to be brave too." Franklin nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Then Delphine looked at young Jasper. "And you, boy, with a voice like an angel, you find your home. You let people love you. You stop running and let yourself be found." Jasper wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Yes, ma'am." Finally, Delphine's gaze returned to Elvis. Her eyes held something strange, something knowing and mysterious that made the hair on Maggie's arms stand up. "There's something you need to know," Delphine said, her voice suddenly stronger, clearer. "Something about why you really forgot those lyrics tonight. It wasn't just exhaustion or illness. It was your soul trying to tell you something important." Elvis leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "The universe has a way of making us forget the wrong things, so we can remember what matters," Delphine said. "You forgot those lyrics because you needed to meet Franklin again. You needed to find Jasper. You needed to see me and Maggie, all of us. We're connected in ways that won't make sense for a long time." "I don't understand," Elvis said softly. Delphine smiled, and her eyes held depths that seemed impossible for a dying woman. "You will. In exactly 48 years, you'll understand everything. This moment, this night, this concert. It's a seed being planted, and when it blooms, it will change more lives than you can possibly imagine." 48 years. Elvis repeated, confused. "Trust me," Delphine whispered. "The story isn't finished yet. The story is just beginning. And what you're recording tonight, that footage you're donating, it will matter more than you know. Keep it safe. Let it live. Because someday, someone will need it exactly the way I needed you tonight." Her words hung in the air like prophecy, like promise, like mystery wrapped in mystery. Elvis didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. "I'll keep it safe. I promise." Delphine settled back against the pillow, her breathing easier now, her face peaceful. "Then I can rest. Then I can let go, knowing the magic will continue." "Don't let go yet," Maggie begged. "Please, Grandma. Stay. Just stay. Oh, baby girl." Delphine said gently, "I'm staying as long as I can. But whenever I do go, you remember I didn't miss the ending. I got to see exactly what I came to see. Not many people get that gift." Elvis stood up slowly, reluctantly. "We should let you rest." "But Delphine," his voice caught. "Thank you for reminding me why any of this matters, for fighting so hard to be here, for believing in magic even when the world tries to convince us it doesn't exist." "Go finish your concert," Delphine said. "Those people are waiting, and this story needs an ending they'll never forget." Elvis, Franklin, Jasper, and the camera crew filed out of the small medical room. Maggie stayed behind, holding her grandmother's hand, feeling the fragile pulse still beating beneath the papery skin. "Go on," Delphine urged. "Go watch the rest. I'll be right here when you get back. I promise." Maggie kissed her grandmother's cheek and reluctantly followed the others into the hallway. Elvis stood waiting for her. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Your grandmother is the strongest person I've ever met. You know that?" Maggie nodded, unable to speak. "What we're about to do, finishing this concert, we're doing it for her. And for everyone else who's fighting to hold on." Ready? Maggie wasn't ready. She'd never be ready to say goodbye to the person she loved most in the world. But she nodded anyway because that's what brave people did. They showed up even when they weren't ready. Together they walked back toward the stage, leaving Delphine in the medical room with her quiet breathing and her mysterious knowledge of a future 48 years away. The walk back to the stage felt longer than the walk away from it. Maggie's hand stayed tucked in Elvis's as they moved through the narrow backstage corridors. Her mind kept replaying her grandmother's words, 48 years. What did that mean? How could Grandma Delphine, who could barely breathe, who might not survive the night, speak with such certainty about something so far in the future? The roar of the waiting crowd grew louder with each step. 15,000 people had stayed in their seats, patient and expectant, trusting that Elvis would return. Their voices created a rumble like distant thunder, talking, wondering, waiting. Franklin walked behind them, his boots echoing against the concrete. His hands trembled at his sides. The brief respite in Delphine's room had given his fear time to grow again, to whisper all the old doubts. 20 years of hiding didn't disappear just because of one song. 20 years of believing he was too damaged to be seen in public didn't vanish because Elvis had welcomed him back. They reached the stage entrance. Through the curtain gap, Franklin could see the grand piano waiting under the lights, black and gleaming and patient. His piano, his purpose, Elvis stopped and turned to face Franklin. "You okay?" "No," Franklin admitted. His voice came out rough and honest. "I'm not okay. I'm terrified. Every person out there is going to see my face on those big screens. They're going to stare. They're going to whisper to each other. Some of them are going to look away because my scars make them uncomfortable." "You're right," Elvis said simply. "Some of them will. Does that change what you need to do?" Franklin looked at Jasper standing nearby, this 12-year-old boy who'd survived on stolen popcorn and slept in a storage room, who'd somehow found the courage to sing in front of thousands when his voice cracked and his shoes had holes. Then he looked at young Maggie, who'd just left her dying grandmother to come back and witness the rest of the concert, carrying the weight of saying goodbye at 11 years old. If they could be brave, "What did you whisper to me earlier?" Franklin asked Elvis. "When I sat at the piano the first time and my hands froze, you knelt down and said something, but the microphone didn't pick it up. What was it?" Elvis smiled. A real smile, not his famous one, but something smaller and more true. "I said the music doesn't care what your face looks like. It only cares if your heart shows up." Franklin felt those words settle into his chest like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread outward. "My heart's here," Franklin said quietly. "It's scared out of its mind, but it's here." "Then that's enough," Elvis replied. "That's always enough." They walked onto the stage together. The explosion of sound was immediate and overwhelming. The crowd leaped to their feet, applause and cheers crashing over the stage like ocean waves. People screamed Elvis's name. They screamed for Jasper. Some even screamed for Franklin, though most didn't know who he was yet. Elvis raised his hand, and gradually the noise settled into expectant silence. "Thank you for waiting," Elvis said into the microphone. His voice was steady, grounded. "What you just witnessed us leaving the stage, going to see Delphine, that wasn't planned. That wasn't part of any script. But that's exactly what tonight is about. It's about choosing people over performance. It's about showing up for the moments that matter." The audience murmured approval. Maggie had returned to her front row seat, and Elvis gestured toward her. "Maggie's grandmother asked me to tell you something. She said that the most beautiful moments come from the broken places. She said that showing up matters more than being perfect." He paused, letting the words sink in. "So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to show up. Imperfectly, honestly. And we're going to finish what we started." Franklin walked to the piano, his legs steadier now but still trembling slightly. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his position, and placed his hands over the keys. The massive screens around the arena showed his face in high definition, every scar, every line, every mark that 20 years of hiding had been meant to conceal. He heard the gasps, saw the shocked expressions on faces in the front rows, watched as people nudged their neighbors and pointed. This was the moment. The moment he could stand up and walk away. The moment he could let fear win again, let shame drive him back into the shadows where scarred men belong. But then he remembered Delphine's words. Every time someone sees them and you play anyway, you give permission for other people to be brave too. Franklin closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The melody that flowed from his fingers wasn't one of Elvis's famous songs. It was something Franklin had written the night before his accident, a piece he'd composed alone in a practice room, thinking about what it meant to be truly seen by another person. He'd never played it for anyone. He'd buried it along with his dreams when the lighting rig fell and changed his face forever. But the music remembered, even if Franklin had tried to forget. His fingers found the notes like greeting old friends who'd waited patiently for 20 years. The melody was bittersweet, full of longing and loss, but also hope. It spoke of hiding and finding, of breaking and healing, of scars that tell stories instead of secrets. Elvis listened for a moment, then began to sing words that Franklin had never written down, but somehow Elvis knew, or maybe Elvis was creating them in real time, pulling lyrics from the same deep well of emotion that the music flowed from. I forgot who I was. In the mirror's cruel reflection, saw a stranger's broken face, where my own used to be. But the music remembers what the mirror can't see, that the cracks let the light in, and the scars set us free. Jasper's voice joined in on the chorus, untrained and pure, cracking on the high notes, but perfect in its imperfection. The three of them created something that transcended technical skill. It was alchemy, turning pain into beauty, shame into celebration. In the audience, something remarkable began happening again. The woman who'd removed her chemotherapy scarf earlier stood up, and this time others joined her. One by one, then in groups, then in waves, people throughout the arena began standing. They weren't just watching a performance anymore, they were participating in a movement. A young man rolled up his sleeve to show burn scars that covered his entire arm. A teenage girl stood on her seat and pulled off her wig, revealing a birthmark that covered half her scalp, something she'd hidden since elementary school when kids first started calling her names. An elderly man unbuttoned his shirt slightly to show the scar from open-heart surgery, the line running down his chest like a map of survival. A middle-aged woman held up a photo, her son who died by suicide 3 years ago. Her scar was invisible, but she wore it every day. Throughout the Memphis Civic Center, people shared their broken places, not with shame, not with apology, with defiance, with pride, with the sudden, powerful understanding that their scars were proof they'd survived something, fought something, overcome something. Franklin played harder, faster, letting 20 years of locked-away emotion pour through his fingers. His face was wet with tears, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was what he'd been named for. Not to hide, but to create beauty from broken places. Not to be perfect, but to be present. Elvis's voice soared over the music, and for the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He was testifying. He was preaching. He was telling the truth about every time he'd felt broken, every time he'd wanted to quit, every time the weight of being the king had crushed him until he couldn't remember why any of it mattered. I forgot my lyrics tonight, Elvis called out between verses, because I forgot how to be human. I forgot that it's okay to fall down. I forgot that asking for help isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing we can do. The crowd responded with a roar of recognition. They understood. They'd all forgotten how to be human at some point. They'd all pretended to be fine when they were falling apart. They'd all worn masks until the masks became more real than their faces. But not tonight. Tonight, the masks were off. Jasper sang with his whole heart, and somewhere in that medical room, Delphine listened through the radio and smiled, knowing that the seed she'd talked about was already beginning to sprout. The song built toward its climax, Franklin's piano thundering, Elvis's voice reaching for the rafters, Jasper's pure tone cutting through everything like a beam of light through darkness. The audience sang too, thousands of voices joining together, not worrying about staying in tune or knowing all the words, just adding their sound to something bigger than themselves. As the music swelled, Franklin's hands flew across the keys with a speed and passion he'd forgotten he possessed. His scarred face was illuminated by spotlights shown on screens throughout the arena, and he was no longer hiding. He was proclaiming, he was declaring that broken things could still make music, that damaged people could still create beauty, that scars were not endings, they were beginnings written in a language only survivors understood. The final chord rang out, sustained and powerful, filling every corner of the vast arena. Franklin held it as long as his fingers could maintain pressure on the keys, as long as his heart could sustain the emotion, as long as the moment could possibly last. Then, slowly, the sound faded into ringing silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire arena existed in a space between heartbeats, suspended in the awareness that they'd just witnessed something that would change them forever. Then the applause began. It started in the back rows and rolled forward like a tsunami, gathering force and volume until it became a physical presence, a wall of sound so powerful that Franklin felt it vibrating through the piano bench, through his bones, through his scarred skin. People weren't just clapping. They were crying, hugging strangers, holding up their scars like battle flags. The Memphis Civic Center had become a sanctuary, a healing place, a space where broken people could finally admit they were broken and discover that broken was beautiful. Elvis let the applause wash over them for a long moment. Then he raised his hand again, asking for quiet. The crowd settled, but the energy remained, crackling and alive and transformed. Elvis looked directly at the camera crew that had been filming everything. His expression was serious, almost solemn. "What happened here tonight needs to reach further than these walls," he said. His voice carried weight, purpose. This moment needs to live forever, not as entertainment, not as a collector's item, as medicine, as proof that broken people can make beautiful things. He paused, and Franklin watched him make a decision in real time, saw it settle over Elvis's face like a mantle of responsibility. "I'm announcing right now, in front of all of you as witnesses," Elvis continued, "that I'm donating this entire concert footage to public television, free for anyone to watch, free for anyone who's forgotten their lyrics, free for anyone who thinks their scars make them invisible." The crowd erupted again, but Elvis wasn't finished. "But more than that," he said, his voice rising over the noise, "I'm making a promise. Starting tomorrow, I'm taking a year off from performing." Gasps rippled through the arena. "A year?" Elvis Presley at the height of his career taking a year off. "I'm going to get healthy," Elvis explained. "Physically, mentally, emotionally. I'm going to show up for myself the way I failed to show up for Franklin 20 years ago. I'm going to prove that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the only way to have anything real to give to others." Franklin felt tears streaming down his scarred face. Elvis was doing this because of him, because of their reunion, because Franklin's absence had taught Elvis something about presence. And during that year, Elvis continued, "I'm starting a foundation. We're calling it Second Song. It's dedicated to helping people like Franklin find their way back to their passions after trauma. To helping kids like Jasper find homes where they're celebrated, not just tolerated. To making sure that people like Delphine, people who are fighting to hold on for one more beautiful moment, get exactly that." The applause was deafening now. But Elvis raised both hands, asking for one final moment of silence. "There's one more thing," he said, and his voice dropped lower, became more intimate despite the microphone carrying it to thousands. "There's something I need to do, something I should have done 20 years ago. She turned to look at Franklin, still sitting at the piano. "Franklin Pierce," Elvis said formally, "I failed you. When you needed me most, I wasn't there. When you disappeared, I should have looked harder, should have never stopped looking. I let my guilt and my career and my own problems keep me from doing the right thing. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." Franklin stood up from the piano bench, his legs shaking. He walked to where Elvis stood at center stage. "You didn't fail me," Franklin said into Elvis's microphone, his voice rough with emotion. "I failed myself. I let fear turn me into a ghost. I let shame convince me that I didn't deserve to be seen. You couldn't have found me because I made sure I couldn't be found." They stood facing each other. Two old friends, two broken men, two people who'd spent 20 years carrying guilt that wasn't entirely theirs to carry. "Then let's make a new promise," Elvis said. "Right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses." "What promise?" Elvis smiled. "That we won't waste any more time hiding. That we'll show up for each other and for everyone else who needs to know they're not alone. That we'll turn our broken places into bridges for other people to cross." Franklin felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been frozen for 20 years finally thawing, finally breathing, finally alive again. "Deal," he said. They shook hands formally like signing a contract. But then Elvis pulled Franklin into another hug, and the audience roared its approval, and Franklin finally believed that maybe his scars didn't make him a monster after all. When they pulled apart, Elvis looked out at the camera again. His expression turned serious, almost haunted. "Delphine told me something before we left her room," he said. "Something I don't fully understand yet. She said that in exactly 48 years, this footage will matter in ways I can't imagine. She said the story isn't finished yet. It's just beginning." He looked directly into the camera lens, as if speaking to someone in the distant future. "So whoever you are, 48 years from now watching this, know that we saw you, we believed in you, we left this message for you. It's okay to forget your lyrics, it's okay to fall down, just get back up, just keep singing. Just remember that you're not alone, and you never were." The arena fell silent again, absorbing the weight of those words. A message in a bottle thrown across decades, waiting for someone in the future to find it and understand. Elvis stood at the center of the stage, bathed in spotlight, looking small and human, despite the legendary jumpsuit and the massive arena around him. Maggie watched from her front row seat, her fingers gripping the armrests so tight they hurt. 48 years. The number kept echoing in her mind. She did the math quickly. 1977 plus 48 would be 2025. What would the world even look like then? Would people still listen to Elvis? Would anyone remember this night? "There's one more song we need to sing," Elvis said, breaking the silence. "But this one is different. This one I need all of you to help me with." He looked at Franklin, who nodded and returned to the piano. He looked at Jasper, who stepped closer to the microphone. Then Elvis looked directly at Maggie. "Maggie Chen, would you come up here one more time?" Maggie's heart stopped. She shook her head frantically. She'd already been on stage once. That was enough. That was more than enough. She could, but the people around her were smiling, encouraging, gently pushing her forward. An usher appeared again, offering a hand to help her navigate the stairs. Before she knew what was happening, Maggie was climbing back onto the stage, her legs wobbling like a newborn deer's. Elvis took her hand and led her to stand between him and Jasper. "This song is for your grandmother," he said softly, just to her. "And for everyone who's fighting to hold on. Can you help us sing it?" "I don't know the words," Maggie whispered. "Neither do I," Elvis said with a gentle smile. "We're making them up as we go, that's the whole point." Franklin began to play slow and haunting, a melody that sounded like starlight and sadness mixed together. The notes fell like rain, each one carrying weight and meaning. Elvis started singing, his voice stripped of all showmanship, all performance. This was just a man singing truth. There's a woman in a small room, fighting for one more dawn. There's a child holding her hand, trying to be strong. There's a man who hid his face for 20 years of shame. There's a boy who had no home, who forgot his own name. Jasper joined in on the next verse, his voice cracking but pure. We're all broken pieces, scattered on the ground. But when we come together, listen to the sound. Elvis gestured for Maggie to sing with them. She opened her mouth, terrified, certain nothing would come out. But then she thought of Grandma Delphine lying in that medical room, listening through a crackling radio, fighting to stay alive long enough to hear this moment. Maggie sang. Her voice was small and shaky and off-key in places, but it was honest. It was real. We're still here. We're still breathing. We're still fighting. Still believing. Then Elvis did something extraordinary. He turned to the audience and said, "Your turn. Every single one of you. Sing it with us. I don't care if you're on key. I don't care if you know the melody. Just sing. Just be here. Just be alive with us right now." 15,000 voices rose together. The sound was massive and messy and magnificent. People sang at different speeds, in different keys, with different levels of skill. Some voices were trained and beautiful, others were rough and untutored, but together they created something that transcended music and became prayer, became healing, became the sound of collective humanity remembering what it meant to be alive. Franklin's piano wove through the voices, holding them together like thread through fabric. His scarred face was wet with tears, but his fingers never faltered. Every note he played was an act of defiance against 20 years of silence. Every chord was a declaration that he existed, he mattered, he was not defined, the worst thing that ever happened to him. Maggie sang louder, finding courage in the ocean of voices around her. She sang for Grandma Delphine. She sang for the woman in row 12, without any hair. She sang for the man who'd shown his prosthetic leg. She sang for Franklin and his scars. She sang for Jasper and all the nights he'd spent alone in a storage room. She sang for Elvis, who'd forgotten his lyrics and found something more important than perfection. The song built and built, wave after wave of sound crashing against the arena walls and echoing back. People swayed in their seats, held hands with strangers, lifted their faces toward the ceiling like flowers turning toward sun. In the medical room, Delphine listened through the radio, and the nurse watched in amazement as the old woman's vital signs stabilized. Her heart rate steadied, her breathing deepened. The monitors showed something that medical science couldn't quite explain. The music was giving her strength, was feeding something in her that medicine couldn't reach. "Remarkable," the nurse whispered, checking the readings again to make sure they were real. "It's like the music is keeping her alive." Delphine smiled, her eyes closed, her body relaxed. "It's not the music, honey. It's the love. That's what we're all made of. That's what keeps us going when everything else fails." Back in the arena, the song reached its final chorus. Elvis, Franklin, Jasper, and Maggie sang together at the center of the stage, surrounded by 15,000 voices that had become one voice. We're still here. We're still breathing. We're still fighting. Still believing that broken things can still make light. But scars are proof. We survived the night. Franklin played the final chord and held it, letting it ring through the entire space. When the last vibration finally faded into silence, no one moved. The moment was too sacred to break with applause. They all just stood there or sat there, breathing together, existing together, connected by something invisible but undeniable. Then slowly a single person began to clap. Then another. Then 10. Then 100. Then all 15,000 at once. But this wasn't the wild screaming applause from earlier. This was different. Slower. More deliberate. The sound of people who'd been changed and knew it, who'd witnessed something that would stay with them forever. Elvis wrapped one arm around Maggie and one around Jasper, pulling them close. Franklin stood from the piano and joined them, and the four of them stood at center stage. A king who'd forgotten his lyrics, a security guard with a scarred face, a homeless boy with a gift, and an 11-year-old girl fighting to be brave. "Thank you," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for being real. Thank you for being brave enough to show your broken places. You've given me the greatest gift I've ever received. You've reminded me why any of this matters." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "This concert is dedicated to Delphine Chen, who fought to be here tonight. To Franklin Pierce, who stepped back into the light after 20 years of darkness. To Jasper Vaughan, who saved my life with a song. And to every single one of you who chose to be vulnerable tonight, who chose to be seen, who chose to believe that broken things can still create beauty." The applause swelled again, and this time Elvis let it wash over them without trying to stop it. He simply stood there with his arm around these three people who'd changed his life in a single night, and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. When the applause finally began to fade, Elvis raised his hand one last time. "Go home tonight and be different," he said. "Go home and call someone you've lost touch with. Go home and forgive someone, including yourself. Go home and choose to be brave tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day that follows, because that's how we change the world, not all at once, but one brave choice at a time." He looked at the cameras again, at the footage that would be stored away for decades before finding its purpose. And 48 years from now, when someone watches this and wonders if it's worth it to keep fighting, I want them to know the answer is yes. Always yes. Keep fighting, keep singing, keep showing up, because you never know who's waiting to be saved by your survival. The lights began to dim slowly, gently, like a lullaby settling over a child. The audience started standing, but they didn't rush for the exits. They lingered, talking quietly to each other, hugging, exchanging phone numbers, making promises to stay in touch with strangers who'd become something more than strangers. Maggie felt Elvis's hand on her shoulder. "Go to her now," he said gently. "Go tell your grandmother everything. Every detail. Every moment. She's waiting." Maggie nodded and ran off the stage, her heart pounding with the desperate need to reach Grandma Delphine, to share everything, to not waste a single second of whatever time they had left. She burst into the medical room, breathless and flushed, and found her grandmother sitting up slightly, the nurse supporting her with pillows. Delphine's eyes were bright, brighter than they'd been in weeks. "Tell me," Delphine said. "Tell me everything." So Maggie did. She told her about standing on stage, about singing even though she was terrified, about 15,000 people showing their scars and singing together, about Franklin's piano and Jasper's voice, and Elvis's promise about the foundation. She told her about the message Elvis sent 48 years into the future, though neither of them understood what it meant. Delphine listened to every word, her face glowing with something that looked like peace, mixed with joy, mixed with triumph. "Perfect," she whispered when Maggie finished. "It's perfect. The seed is planted." "What seed, Grandma?" "I don't understand." Delphine took Maggie's hand. "You will, baby girl. Someday you'll understand everything. But for now, just know this. What happened tonight wasn't an accident. It was meant to happen. All of it. Elvis forgetting his lyrics, Franklin coming back, Jasper singing, You being brave, it was all connected. All necessary. All part of a story that's bigger than any of us can see right now. But how do you know? Maggie asked, frustrated by the mystery of it all. Because I've lived long enough to recognize magic when I see it, Delphine said simply. And tonight was pure magic. The kind that ripples out in ways we can't predict. The kind that changes the future. A knock on the door interrupted them. Elvis Franklin and Jasper stood in the doorway, still in their stage clothes, looking exhausted and exhilarated. We wanted to check on you before we left, Elvis said to Delphine. To make sure you're okay. Better than okay, Delphine assured him. Thanks to all of you, I got to witness exactly what I needed to see before I go. You gave an old woman the greatest gift. You reminded me that the world is still full of people who choose love over fear. That's everything. That's all that matters. Elvis knelt beside her bed. You told me about 48 years from now, about this footage mattering. Can you tell me anything else? Anything that might help me understand? Delphine's eyes twinkled with secrets. Only this. Keep that footage safe. Protect it. When the time comes, the right person will find it. Someone who needs it desperately. Someone who will use it to change countless lives. She paused, breathing carefully. And Elvis, keep your promise. Take that year off. Start the foundation. Get healthy. Because your life matters more than your career, and the world needs you alive more than it needs you performing. Elvis nodded solemnly. I promise. Second Song Foundation starts next week. Franklin will help run it. Jasper will be our first success story. We're finding him a home where he'll be loved and celebrated. Jasper wiped his eyes. In one night, he'd gone from sleeping in a storage room to having a future. From being invisible to being seen. Thank you, Jasper whispered. Thank you for not sending me back to the children's home. We're family now, Elvis said firmly. All of us. Family doesn't have to be blood. It just has to be people who show up for each other. Franklin stood quietly in the corner, his scarred face peaceful for the first time in 20 years. He'd walked onto that stage convinced he was a monster, and he'd walked off knowing he was human. Broken, yes. Scarred, certainly. But human. Worthy. Valuable. I'll come visit you, Franklin promised Delphine. I'll tell you about everyone we helped through the foundation. About every person who finds their second song. I'd like that, Delphine said softly. Then her face grew serious. But Franklin, don't wait until I'm dying to show people who you really are. Promise me you'll keep being visible. Keep letting people see those scars, because you're writing permission for others to stop hiding too. I promise, Franklin said, and meant it. They stayed a few more minutes talking quietly, sharing the gentle silence of people who'd been through something profound together. Then one by one, they said their goodbyes and left, until only Maggie and Delphine remained. I'm tired now, baby girl, Delphine whispered. So tired. Then rest, Maggie said, though her voice trembled. I'll be right here. I won't leave you. You might have to eventually, Delphine said gently, but not yet. Not tonight. Tonight you can stay. Maggie climbed carefully onto the cot beside her grandmother, tucking herself against Delphine's frail side the way she used to when she was smaller. The nurse brought a blanket and draped it over both of them, then dimmed the lights and quietly left the room. In the darkness, Maggie whispered, Grandma, what's going to happen in 48 years? Why does that number matter? Delphine was quiet for so long that Maggie thought she'd fallen asleep. But then she spoke, her voice dreamy and distant. In 48 years, someone will be sitting in an office feeling lost and hopeless, wondering if anything matters anymore. And they'll discover this footage, this concert, this night, these moments, and it will save them. It will remind them that broken people can make beautiful things. And they'll use it to save thousands of others. She paused. The magic you witnessed tonight, Maggie, it doesn't end here. It's just beginning. This is the seed. What grows from it will be more miraculous than you can possibly imagine. How do you know all this? Maggie asked. Because, Delphine whispered, some people are lucky enough to see a little further than others. And I've been given the gift of knowing that my granddaughter, my beautiful, brave Maggie, is going to be part of that miracle. You're going to carry this story forward. You're going to make sure the magic doesn't die. Maggie wanted to ask more questions, but Delphine's breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. So Maggie just held her grandmother close and listened to her heartbeat, slower than it should be, weaker than it used to be, but still beating, still fighting, still here. Outside the medical room, the Memphis Civic Center slowly emptied. 15,000 people returned to their lives, but they were different now, carrying something precious inside them. The memory of a night when broken people made beautiful things, when scars became sources of pride instead of shame, when forgetting turned out to be the doorway to remembering what really mattered. And somewhere in a storage facility, reels of footage waited patiently to fulfill their purpose. 48 years in the future. 6 weeks passed. Maggie stood in the kitchen of Grandma Delphine's small house above the bakery, washing breakfast dishes while her grandmother sat at the table, reading the newspaper. Morning sunlight streamed through the yellow curtains, making patterns on the worn linoleum floor. 6 weeks since the concert that was supposed to be Delphine's goodbye. 6 weeks past the 3-week deadline the doctors had given. 6 weeks of waking up each morning surprised to find her grandmother still breathing, still smiling, still here. The doctors called it impossible. They ran new tests, checked the original diagnosis 3 times, consulted with specialists. The cancer was still there, it hadn't disappeared, but it had stopped growing. More than that, it had somehow stabilized. Delphine's heart, which had been failing that night at the concert, was now functioning better than it had in months. Spontaneous remission, one doctor had said, frowning at the charts like they'd betrayed him. It happens sometimes. We don't understand why. But Maggie understood. She'd been there in that medical room when Franklin sang, and Elvis promised, and 15,000 people chose love over fear. She'd felt something shift in the universe that night, something that science couldn't measure, but hearts could feel. You're thinking loud again, Delphine said from her seat at the table, not looking up from the newspaper. Maggie smiled. Just thinking about how you're still here. Surprise! Every single day. Delphine set down the paper and looked at her granddaughter. The color had returned to her cheeks over the past weeks. Her eyes were clearer. She still moved slowly, still tired easily, but she was alive in a way that defied every medical prediction. I told you the story wasn't finished yet, Delphine said. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maggie dried her hands on a towel and went to answer it, finding Franklin Pierce standing on the small porch. He wore a simple blue shirt and khaki pants, normal clothes, not a security uniform. His scarred face broke into a genuine smile when he saw her. Morning, Maggie. Is Delphine up for a visit? She's always up for visits from you, Maggie said, stepping aside to let him in. Franklin had come every week since the concert, sometimes twice a week. He brought updates about the Second Song Foundation, which was already helping its first group of trauma survivors reconnect with their passions. He brought stories about Jasper, who'd been placed with a foster family, a music teacher, and his wife, who'd always wanted children. He brought sheet music, and sometimes his portable keyboard, playing gentle melodies for Delphine while Maggie did homework at the kitchen table. But mostly, he brought himself. His presence, his proof that broken people could heal. I have news, Franklin said as he settled into the chair across from Delphine. His hands trembled slightly. They still did that sometimes when he was excited or nervous. Big news. Tell us, Delphine urged. Elvis kept his promise. He took the entire year off, just like he said he would. No performances, no recordings, no public appearances. He checked into a health facility last month. Nothing dramatic, just a place where he can rest, eat properly, work with therapists. He's getting better, Delphine. Really better. Maggie felt relief wash through her. She'd worried about Elvis in the weeks since the concert, wondering if the promise had been just words spoken in an emotional moment. In the foundation? Delphine asked. Franklin's scarred face lit up. We've helped 43 people so far. 43 people who'd given up on their passions because of trauma, because of accidents, because of shame. We were helping them find their way back. He paused, and his voice grew thick. There was a woman last week, a painter, who lost her right hand in a car accident 5 years ago. She'd convinced herself she could never create art again. We connected her with an adaptive arts program, and yesterday she sent me a photo of her first painting since the accident. She'd learned to paint with her left hand. It was beautiful, Delphine. It was so beautiful I cried. That's your legacy, Delphine said softly. That's what happened when you chose to step back into the light. No, Franklin corrected gently. That's our legacy, all of us. You, me, Elvis, Jasper, Maggie. Everyone who was in that arena that night. We proved something together, that broken things can still make light. Another knock at the door. This time it was a delivery person with a large package. Maggie signed for it and brought it inside, reading the return address with surprise. It's from Elvis, she said. They opened the package together, finding a letter on top and something wrapped in tissue paper beneath it. Delphine put on her reading glasses and read the letter aloud. Dear Delphine, Maggie and Franklin, I'm writing this from the health facility where I've been staying for the past month. It's quiet here. Peaceful. I've been sleeping more than I have in 10 years. Eating real food instead of pills and junk. Talking to therapists about things I've kept locked inside since my mother died. I'm learning that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. You can't give from an empty well. You taught me that, Delphine. You taught me that fighting to stay alive, really alive, not just breathing, is the bravest thing anyone can do. The foundation is thriving beyond anything I imagined. Franklin tells me about every person we help, and each story feels like a small miracle. That's what you gave us that night. You reminded us that miracles are real if we're brave enough to create them. I'm including something with this letter. It's the master copy of the concert footage. I've had copies made and stored in 3 different locations: New York, Los Angeles, and here in Memphis. I've arranged for them to be preserved indefinitely. One day, when the time is right, this footage will find its purpose. You told me 48 years, Delphine. I don't know what that means or what will happen, but I'm trusting you. I'm keeping this safe for whoever needs it. Until then, keep fighting. Keep showing up. Keep being the miracle. With love and gratitude, Elvis. Delphine's hands shook as she folded the letter. Beneath the tissue paper they found a framed photograph from the concert, the moment when all 4 of them stood at center stage together. Elvis's arm around Maggie, Jasper standing tall despite his 2 big boots, Franklin at the piano with his scarred face, peaceful and proud. He's keeping his promise, Franklin said quietly. All of them. The year off, the foundation, preserving the footage, everything. Of course he is, Delphine said. That night changed him the same way it changed all of us. You can't go through something like that and stay the same person. Maggie stared at the photograph, at her own 11-year-old face frozen in that moment of terror and triumph. Grandma, what happens when we get to 2025? What happens when 48 years have passed? Delphine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph frame. "I won't be here to see it, baby girl, but you will. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do. You'll make sure the right person finds this footage. You'll make sure the miracle continues." "Don't talk like that," Maggie said, her voice catching. "You're doing better." "The doctors said." "The doctors said I was supposed to be dead 6 weeks ago," Delphine interrupted gently. "Every day since has been a gift. Every morning I wake up is a bonus I wasn't supposed to get. But gifts don't last forever, sweetheart. Eventually I will have to go. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday." Tears burned behind Maggie's eyes. She'd been so focused on the miracle of her grandmother's continued survival that she'd forgotten the original truth. Cancer didn't disappear just because you wanted it to. It waited. It was patient. "When that day comes," Delphine continued, "I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll carry this story forward. You'll remember what happened that night and why it mattered. You'll make sure that when 2025 arrives, the footage finds its purpose. Can you promise me that?" Maggie wiped her eyes and nodded. "I promise." "Say it out loud, baby. Promises are more real when we speak them." "I promise I'll carry the story forward," Maggie said clearly. "I promise I'll make sure the footage finds its purpose in 2025. I promise I'll remember everything." "Good girl," Delphine said, and the pride in her voice made Maggie stand a little straighter. Franklin cleared his throat. "I should probably tell you, there's talk of me being interviewed for a magazine article about the foundation. They want to photograph me, my face, my scars, everything. They want to tell the whole story." "Are you going to do it?" Delphine asked. Franklin touched his scars, that old habit, but this time without shame. "Yes, because you were right that night. Every time I let people see these scars and I keep living anyway, keep creating anyway, I give permission for other people to be brave too. That's the ripple," Delphine said, smiling. "That's how one night turns into a movement. One person chooses courage, and it gives someone else permission to choose courage, and it spreads outward like rings in water." Elvis forgot his lyrics, and because of that, you stepped back into the light. Because you stepped into the light, 43 people have found their way back to their passions, and those 43 people will inspire others, who will inspire others, and on until the original moment is almost forgotten, but its effects are everywhere. She looked at the photograph again, at the 4 of them frozen in that moment of shared vulnerability. "That's the real magic of what happened that night," Delphine continued. "Not that I survived longer than expected, though I'm grateful for every bonus day. The real magic is that we proved something true. Broken people can make beautiful things, and once that truth is proven, it can never be unproven. It lives forever." They sat together in comfortable silence, sunlight streaming through yellow curtains, the photograph resting on the table between them like a promise, like a seed, like the beginning of something that would take 48 years to bloom. Delphine died peacefully in her sleep 4 months later, on a cold January morning, when frost covered the windows and made the world look like it was wrapped in lace. Maggie found her, still tucked under the quilt she'd made herself years ago, her face peaceful and younger looking than it had been in years. The cancer had finally won its battle, but slowly, gently, giving Delphine 4 bonus months to say proper goodbyes, to finish her stories, to make sure Maggie understood what needed to be carried forward. The funeral was small but full of love. Franklin came and played piano, the soft, beautiful piece he'd written specifically for Delphine, about fighters and survivors, and people brave enough to witness one more moment of beauty. Jasper sang, his voice clearer now after months of proper food and music lessons, but still carrying that raw emotional honesty that had saved Elvis's life. Elvis sent flowers, an enormous arrangement that took up half the funeral home, and a letter that Maggie read standing beside her grandmother's casket. Delphine gave me the greatest gift anyone ever has. She reminded me that being human is more important than being a king. She taught me that broken things make the most beautiful light. She showed me that fighting to stay alive, really alive, is sacred work. I will carry her forward in everything I do. Maggie folded the letter carefully and placed it in the casket beside her grandmother, along with a photograph from the concert and a single flower from the arrangement Elvis had sent. "I'll keep my promise," Maggie whispered to Delphine's still form. "When 2025 comes, I'll make sure the footage finds who needs it. I'll make sure your story continues." She touched her grandmother's hand one final time, cold now but somehow still feeling like home, and said goodbye to the bravest person she'd ever known. Years passed. Maggie grew up, went to college, studied arts administration. She never forgot the promise. She kept in touch with Franklin, who continued running the Second Song Foundation long after Elvis returned to performing. She watched Jasper grow up and become a music therapist, using his gift to heal others the way he'd been healed. She watched Elvis keep his promises too, healthier now, more present, using his platform to talk about vulnerability and healing. The Second Song Foundation helped thousands of people over the years, growing into an international organization, with chapters in 15 countries. But the concert footage remained mostly forgotten, stored in archives, occasionally mentioned in Elvis documentaries, but never given its full due. The world wasn't ready for it yet. The right person hadn't found it yet. Maggie kept the photograph on her desk wherever she worked, a reminder of the night that changed everything, of the promise she'd made, of the grandmother who'd seen 48 years into the future and known exactly what would be needed. And she waited. She waited for the person Delphine had known would come. She waited for the moment when a seed planted in 1977 would finally bloom into the miracle it was always meant to become. 2025, 48 years later, Maggie Chen sat in her corner office on the 15th floor of a Los Angeles high-rise, staring at the photograph that had lived on every desk she'd ever owned. She was 59 years old now, her black hair streaked with silver, reading glasses perched on her nose. But when she looked at that 11-year-old girl in the photograph, she could still feel everything from that night. Outside her window, the city sprawled endlessly, a maze of glass and steel and possibility. She was the director of the Second Song Foundation now, had been for 12 years. Franklin had retired at 78, handing her the reins with trembling, scarred hands and eyes full of trust. "You were always meant to lead this," he'd told her. "From the moment you stood on that stage at 11 years old, I knew. You carry Delphine's spirit. You remember what matters." Franklin had died 2 years ago, peacefully, surrounded by the hundreds of people he'd helped over the decades. Jasper, now 60 years old and still working as a music therapist, had sung at his funeral, and everyone there had cried at the beauty of it. Elvis had died in 1977, just 5 months after the concert, despite all his promises to get healthy. His heart had given out in the middle of the night, but the year he'd lived after that concert, really lived fully present and healing, had been different. His final interviews showed a man at peace, a man who'd finally understood what mattered. The Second Song Foundation had been his living legacy, continuing long after his death. Maggie had carried all of them forward. Every decision she made, every person the foundation helped, every life transformed, it all traced back to that August night in 1977 when Elvis forgot his lyrics and found something more important than perfection. But today was different. Today, the 48 years had finally passed. A knock on her office door pulled her from her memories. "Miss Chen?" Her assistant poked his head in. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Ezra Musk and his uncle. Maggie's heart skipped. She'd been expecting this meeting for weeks, ever since the young tech innovator had reached out with his proposal about restoring the concert footage. But she hadn't known his uncle would be coming to. "Send them in," she said, straightening her desk, though it didn't need straightening. Nervous habit. Some things never change. The door opened and two men walked in. The younger one, Ezra Musk, maybe 28 or 29, had the bright, intense energy of someone who saw possibilities others missed. Behind him came his uncle, a man in his 50s whose face Maggie recognized from countless news articles and interviews. Elon Musk, the billionaire innovator who'd revolutionized electric cars, space travel, and social media. The man whose companies had changed the world. He looked tired today, Maggie noticed. The weight of running multiple massive companies showed in the lines around his eyes. "Miss Chen," Ezra said, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting with us." "This is my uncle, Elon." "I know who he is," Maggie said with a slight smile, shaking both their hands. "Please sit." They settled into the chairs across from her desk. Elon's eyes immediately went to the photograph beside her computer, the four figures on stage, frozen in that moment of shared vulnerability. "Is that from the 1977 concert?" he asked, leaning forward. "Yes. I was the little girl in the front row. The one Elvis brought on stage." Elon's expression transformed. Decades of stress falling away to reveal something younger, more innocent. "You were there? You were actually there that night?" "Front row. My grandmother, Delphine, had bought the tickets. She was dying of cancer. The doctors gave her 3 weeks. She wanted to see Elvis one more time." Maggie's voice steadied as she told the story she'd told 1,000 times, but never grew tired of sharing. Elvis collapsed on stage. Everything went wrong. And then everything went right in ways we couldn't have predicted. "I watched it," Elon said quietly. "The footage. I was 6 years old, living in South Africa. My mother had somehow gotten a copy, a grainy third-generation recording that a friend had smuggled out. We watched it on our television one night, and it changed my entire life." Maggie felt her breath catch. "What do you mean?" Elon's words came slowly, carefully, like he was excavating something precious from deep inside. "I watched Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the most successful performer in the world, forget his lyrics, collapse on stage, fail completely, and instead of ending in disaster, it became the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. He got back up. He brought a homeless boy on stage. He reunited with his old friend. He turned failure into something transcendent." He paused, and his voice grew thick with emotion. "I've built companies that people said were impossible. I've failed publicly more times than I can count. Every rocket that exploded, every production delay, every moment when everyone told me to quit, I survived because of what I learned that night when I was 6 years old. That failure isn't the end. It's the doorway. It's where the real magic begins." Maggie felt tears prickling behind her eyes. 48 years. Her grandmother had said the footage would save someone who desperately needed it, who would use it to save thousands of others. She'd been talking about this man. "My nephew has developed AI technology that can restore and enhance the footage," Elon continued. "The original recordings are deteriorating. They won't last another decade without serious intervention. But with Ezra's technology, we can not only save it, we can make it available to everyone in perfect quality forever." Ezra leaned forward eagerly. "But there's more. When I was digitizing the footage to test our restoration algorithms, I found something strange in the audio. Something that wasn't picked up by the 1977 technology because it existed below the normal hearing threshold. A frequency that modern equipment can detect and amplify." What kind of frequency, Nancy? Maggie asked, though something inside her already knew. Grandma Delphine's words echoed across the decades. The story isn't finished yet. A voice, Ezra said. Elvis's voice, speaking during the moment when he collapsed on stage. The original audience couldn't hear it. Even the people on stage probably couldn't hear it. But it's there, preserved in the analog recording, waiting for technology to catch up and reveal it. He pulled out a tablet and placed it on Maggie's desk. We isolated it, cleaned it up, and extracted the words. Miss Chen, I think you need to hear this. Maggie's hands trembled as she reached for the tablet. Ezra pressed play. At first, there was only the ambient sound of the arena, the gasps of 15,000 people, the shuffle of footsteps, the chaos of Elvis collapsing. But then, beneath everything else, a voice emerged. Elvis's voice, but different, dreamlike, speaking as if from some other place beyond consciousness. If anyone finds this message in 2025, know this. I forgot the lyrics. Because I was supposed to. My mother came to me in that moment between consciousness and darkness. She told me I was singing the wrong song. The song I was meant to sing wasn't for entertainment, it was for healing. The three people I met that night, Franklin, Jasper, and Delphine, they were angels sent to show me that broken things create the most beautiful light. Maggie's breath caught. It was exactly what her grandmother had said before she died, that Elvis had been shown something in that moment of collapse, something that explained everything. The voice continued. In 2025, the world will be more connected than ever, but people will feel more alone. They'll need to remember what happened in this arena. They'll need to know that forgetting isn't failure, it's your soul telling you to remember something more important. Tell them to look for the Franklins in their lives, the people they lost touch with. Tell them to be a home for the Jaspers, the ones who have nowhere to go. Tell them to honor the Delphines, who fight to witness one more beautiful thing before they leave. A pause, then the voice grew stronger, more urgent. If someone is listening to this in 2025 and they've built something that changed the world, if they've failed publicly and succeeded privately, if they've tried to make humanity's future brighter, tell them it's not enough to reach for the stars. They have to bring people with them. They have to remember that technology without humanity is just machinery. Innovation without compassion is just progress toward nothing that matters. The recording ended. Maggie looked up at Elon and saw tears streaming down his face. The man who'd sent rockets to space, who'd revolutionized transportation, who'd become one of the richest and most influential people on Earth, he was crying like a child. He was talking to me, Elon whispered. Across 48 years, he was talking directly to me. Yes, Maggie said softly. My grandmother knew someone would need this message. She knew you would need it. But how? How could she possibly know? Maggie smiled through her own tears. She told me once that some people are lucky enough to see a little further than others. She saw you, Elon. She saw what you would build and what you would need to remember while building it. She saw that you'd be brilliant and driven and successful and lonely, that you'd change the world but forget why it mattered, that you'd need to be reminded that broken people make beautiful light. Elon buried his face in his hands. Ezra put a hand on his uncle's shoulder, letting him feel whatever needed to be felt. When Elon finally looked up, his eyes were red but clear. I've been so focused on Mars, on electric cars, on AI, on making humanity multiplanetary. I've sacrificed relationships, burned bridges, pushed people away. I told myself it was necessary, that the mission mattered more than anything else. But I've been miserable, successful and miserable. Because you forgot your lyrics, Maggie said gently. You forgot the song you were really supposed to be singing. What song is that? The one about bringing people with you. about making sure your success lifts others up instead of leaving them behind, about remembering that technology serves humanity, not the other way around. She paused. Elvis learned that lesson the hardest way possible, by collapsing on stage, by failing completely, by having to be saved by a homeless boy with a pure voice. You don't have to collapse to learn it. You just have to listen. Elon was quiet for a long time, staring at the photograph on Maggie's desk. Finally he spoke. "What do you need from me? What would honor what happened that night?" Maggie had been preparing for this question for 48 years. She'd known it was coming since she was 11 years old, holding her dying grandmother's hand and promising to carry the story forward. 3 things, she said. First, restore the footage using Ezra's technology and release it globally for free. Let anyone who needs it watch it, share it, learn from it. The world needs this message now more than it needed it in. Done, Elon said immediately. What else? Second, help us expand the second song foundation. Use your resources, your platform, your influence to help us reach more people. There are millions of Franklins out there, people who've hidden their gifts because of trauma, because of shame, because they think they're too broken to matter. Help us find them. Help us remind them they're wrong. Done, Elon said again. And the third thing, Maggie took a deep breath. This was the big one. The request that would either change everything or sound completely insane. My grandmother told me that when the right person found this footage, they would use it to save thousands of others. You're that person, Elon. You've already saved people by inspiring them to think bigger, reach further, try harder. But now I'm asking you to save them differently. How? By being vulnerable, by telling your own story of failure and recovery, by showing people that even brilliant, successful innovators are just humans who forget their lyrics sometimes, by proving that it's okay to admit you're broken, you're struggling, you need help. Elon flinched. You're asking me to be publicly vulnerable, to show weakness. I'm asking you to show humanity, Maggie corrected gently. Elvis didn't become more beloved because he was perfect. He became beloved because he collapsed on stage and got back up. Because he admitted he'd forgotten important things. Because he showed people that even kings are human. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. There are people out there right now who worship you, Elon. They think you're superhuman. And because they think that, they also think they could never do what you do. They're not smart enough, not brave enough, not enough. They've given up before they started because the bar seems impossibly high. She turned back to face him. But if you showed them your scars, if you admitted your failures, your loneliness, your fears, if you proved that broken people can still build beautiful things, you wouldn't lose their respect. You'd give them permission to try. You'd give them permission to be imperfect and brilliant at the same time. Elon stared at her, and Maggie could see the war happening behind his eyes. The successful businessman who'd built an empire on projecting confidence versus the broken human who remembered being 6 years old and watching Elvis forget his lyrics. That's terrifying, he finally said. Yes, Maggie agreed. All the important things. Ezra spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Uncle Elon, you've told me about that concert my whole life. You've talked about how it changed you, shaped you, taught you that failure was just the beginning. Maybe it's time to share that lesson publicly. Maybe that's your second song. Elon closed his eyes. Maggie waited, barely breathing. 48 years had built to this moment. Everything her grandmother had seen, everything Elvis had embedded in that hidden message, everything the foundation had worked toward, it all came down to whether one brilliant, broken man could choose vulnerability over image. Finally, Elon opened his eyes. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do all 3 things. I'll fund the restoration and global release. I'll expand the foundation's reach using every resource I have. And he swallowed hard. I'll tell my story. The real one, not the press release version. Maggie felt something shift in the universe, a click, like a key turning in a lock, like a seed finally breaking through soil after 48 years of patient waiting. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to continue what they started." "No," Elon said, standing up and extending his hand. "Thank you for carrying this forward all these years. Thank you for keeping the promise you made to your grandmother. Thank you for making sure I found what I needed exactly when I needed it most." They shook hands, and Maggie felt the weight of 48 years lift from her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd kept her promise. The seed had bloomed. 3 months later, the world watched something unprecedented unfold. The restored footage of the 1977 Elvis Presley concert premiered simultaneously across every continent, free on every streaming platform, broadcast on public television, available to anyone with an internet connection. Elon Musk's AI technology had transformed the grainy, degraded original into crystal clear high definition. Every emotion on Elvis's face, every scar on Franklin's, every crack in young Jasper's voice, all preserved perfectly, waiting to touch hearts that hadn't even been born when the concert happened. Within the first week, 200 million people watched it. Within the first month, that number doubled. But the footage itself was only the beginning. Elon Musk had kept all 3 promises he'd made in Maggie's office. The foundation received an injection of funding that allowed them to expand to 50 countries. They opened centers in major cities around the world, each one dedicated to helping trauma survivors reconnect with their abandoned dreams. And Elon had done the hardest thing. He'd been vulnerable. He'd recorded a video message that played before the concert footage, sitting in a simple chair against a plain background, no special effects or production tricks, just a man talking honestly about failure and fear, and the loneliness that came with success. "When I was 6 years old," he'd said in that video, "I watched Elvis Presley forget his lyrics. I watched him collapse on stage in front of 15,000 people, and I watched him turn that failure into the most beautiful moment I'd ever witnessed. That night taught me something I've spent my whole life trying to live up to. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the foundation of it." He'd paused, and viewers around the world saw his eyes grow wet. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that lesson. I started believing that showing weakness was the same as being weak. That admitting I was struggling meant I was failing. That if I just pushed harder, worked longer, sacrificed more, I could somehow become invincible. He'd shaken his head. "I was wrong. And I've been lonely. Successful and miserable and lonely." The video had gone viral within hours, not because it was scandalous or shocking, but because it was real. People were starving for authenticity from their heroes, desperate for permission to be imperfect. Now, on a warm August evening in 2025, exactly 48 years to the day after the original concert, Maggie stood backstage at the newly renovated Memphis Civic Center. The foundation had organized a special event, a live concert celebrating the legacy of that transformative night, with all proceeds going to help trauma survivors around the world. Jasper was there, now 60 years old but still possessing that pure, aching voice. He would perform tonight, singing the same songs he'd sung 48 years ago when he was a homeless 12-year-old with holes in his shoes. Elon and Elon Musk were there, sitting in the front row where Maggie and her grandmother had sat decades before. Elon had insisted on buying those exact seats, wanting to experience what Delphine had experienced, the vulnerability of being seen, the courage it took to witness beauty when your heart was breaking. Performers from around the world had volunteered for the concert, Grammy winners and street musicians, classical virtuosos and self-taught amateurs. The only requirement was that each performer shared a story of brokenness and recovery before they sang. No hiding behind talent, no pretending to be invincible. Maggie stood in the wings, watching the arena fill with people. 15,000 seats, just like in 1977. Every single one sold out within minutes, with the waiting list stretching to over 1 million people. They'd live-stream the concert globally. But these 15,000 had wanted to be present, to occupy the same physical space where the miracle had first happened. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to find a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with nervous eyes and a guitar case slung over her back. "Miss Chen, I'm performing tonight. Third set. I just wanted to say..." The young woman's voice caught. "I watched the 1977 footage 3 months ago. I was planning to quit music completely. I'd been in a car accident that damaged my hands. I couldn't play the way I used to, couldn't hit the same notes, couldn't be perfect anymore. I thought that meant I was done. But you're here," Maggie said gently. "I'm here because I watched Franklin Pierce play piano with a scarred face and shaking hands. And I realized it's not about being perfect, it's about showing up anyway. It's about making beauty from the broken places." Tears streamed down her face. "You saved my life. That footage, that story, the foundation, you saved my life." Maggie pulled the young woman into a hug, feeling the weight of 48 years of waiting suddenly make sense. This was why. This moment, this person, and millions of others like her around the world. They were the reason Delphine had fought to stay alive long enough to witness the concert. They were the reason Elvis had embedded that hidden message. They were the reason Maggie had carried the promise forward through decades of doubt and difficulty. "You saved yourself," Maggie whispered. "You just needed permission to try. Now go save someone else. Go play tonight like your broken hands are the most beautiful thing about you." The young woman nodded and walked toward the stage entrance, her guitar case bumping gently against her back. The concert began at 8 o'clock. The lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. And on the massive screens throughout the arena, a video appeared, not a recording but live feed from the medical room where Delphine had lain dying 48 years ago. Except now it wasn't a medical room. It had been converted into a small museum, preserved exactly as it had been that night. The cot where Delphine had rested, the chair where Franklin had sat, the radio through which they'd listened to the concert, and standing in that room, speaking directly to the camera, was Maggie Chen. 48 years ago, she said, her voice steady and clear, "My grandmother brought me to this building to see Elvis Presley perform. She was dying of cancer. The doctors had given her 3 weeks to live, but she fought to be here because she believed in magic. The kind of magic that happens when broken people choose to show up for each other." The camera panned slowly around the preserved room, capturing every detail. Elvis forgot his lyrics that night. He collapsed on this very stage. Everything went wrong. But because everything went wrong, something miraculous happened. A homeless boy found his voice. A scarred musician stepped back into the light. A dying woman received 4 bonus months of life, and a message was planted. A seed that took 48 years to bloom. Maggie looked directly into the camera, speaking to every person in the arena and every person watching around the world. "My grandmother, Delphine Chen, told me before she died that this night would matter in ways I couldn't imagine. She was right." The footage from 1977 has now been watched by over 400 million people. The Second Song Foundation has helped over 100,000 trauma survivors reconnect with their passions. And countless others, people we'll never meet, stories we'll never hear, have found the courage to keep going, because they learned that broken things make beautiful light. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle. But the story doesn't end here. It never ends. Every person who watches that footage and chooses courage over fear They're writing the next chapter. Every person who reaches out to someone they lost touch with, who mentors a young person who feels invisible, who helps someone near the end of their life experience one more moment of joy, they're honoring what happened here. The camera moved closer to Maggie's face, showing the silver in her hair, the lines around her eyes, the 11-year-old girl she used to be still visible in her features. So tonight we're not just celebrating what happened 48 years ago, we're celebrating what happens next. We're planting new seeds, we're creating new miracles. We're proving once again that the most beautiful performances come from people who've known darkness and chosen to step into light anyway. The screen faded to black and the arena erupted in applause. The performances that followed were extraordinary. Jasper sang with tears streaming down his 60-year-old face, his voice still cracking on the high notes, but perfect in its imperfection. Between songs he told the story of being 12 and homeless, of stealing food to survive, of thinking he was invisible until the night he sang for an unconscious king. A teenage girl with cerebral palsy performed a piano piece she'd written herself, her hands moving in ways that doctors had said were impossible. Before she played, she talked about watching the 1977 footage and seeing Franklin's scarred, trembling hands create beauty and realizing her own different hands could do the same. A man in his 40s sang about losing his business, his marriage, and nearly his life to depression. Then finding the second song foundation and discovering that his story of failure was actually a story of survival worth sharing. An elderly woman performed on violin, explaining that she'd given up music 60 years ago when she'd been told women couldn't be professional musicians. Watching Delphine fight to witness one more beautiful thing had inspired her to pick up the violin again at 83 years old, to have one more beautiful moment before she died. On and on. Story after story, song after song, a tapestry of brokenness and healing, of scars turned into sources of pride, of people who'd forgotten their lyrics and found something more important than perfection. Between performances, the screens showed updates from around the world. In Tokyo, a flash mob of trauma survivors gathered in a public square to sing together. In London, a group of veterans with PTSD organized a concert in Hyde Park. In São Paulo, artists painted a massive mural depicting Elvis's collapse and resurrection. In Mumbai, schoolchildren performed a play about the homeless boy who saved a king. The movement that had started in Memphis in 1977 had become global, unstoppable, transforming lives in languages Elvis had never spoken, in countries he'd never visited, for reasons that transcended music and became about something bigger, about humanity remembering how to be human. At the end of the concert, something unexpected happened. Elon Musk stood up from his front row seat and walked onto the stage. He hadn't been scheduled to perform. This wasn't planned, but the audience recognized him immediately, and a murmur rippled through the arena. What was he doing? Elon took the microphone from the stand, his hands shaking slightly, just like Franklin's had shaken 48 years ago. "I don't sing," he said simply. "I'm terrible at it, actually. But tonight isn't about being good at things. It's about showing up anyway." He looked out at the 15,000 faces watching him, all of them suddenly seeing not the billionaire innovator, not the man who'd sent rockets to space, but just a human being standing vulnerably in front of strangers. The 1977 concert taught me that failure was okay, Elon continued, but I forgot that lesson. I've spent decades building companies, chasing impossible goals, trying to make humanity's future brighter. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being human myself. I stopped admitting when I was struggling. I stopped asking for help. I stopped letting people see me as anything other than successful. His voice cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. 3 months ago, I heard a message that Elvis left for me. Across 48 years, he told me that it wasn't enough to reach for the stars. I had to bring people with me. That technology, without humanity, was just machinery. That I needed to remember why any of this mattered. He looked at Maggie standing in the wings, and she nodded encouragement. So I'm here tonight to tell you that I'm broken too. That I've failed more times than I've succeeded. That I'm lonely and scared and uncertain about whether anything I'm doing actually matters. That I need help. I need connection. I need to remember how to be human while trying to build humanity's future. The arena was completely silent. 15,000 people holding their collective breath. And I'm here to make a promise. Elon continued. The same promise Elvis made 48 years ago. I'm taking time off. I'm getting help. I'm making sure that my companies serve humanity instead of just serving progress. I'm remembering that broken things make the most beautiful light. He paused, then smiled, not his famous confident smile, but something smaller and more real. I told you I don't sing, but I'm going to try anyway, because that's what tonight is about. Trying even when you're not good enough. Showing up even when you're scared. Being human even when the world expects you to be superhuman. He began to sing terribly. Off-key, forgetting words. The same song Elvis had sung 48 years ago. The song about broken pieces and beautiful light, about scars and survival, about showing up even when everything feels impossible. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't judge. Instead, one by one, they stood and sang with him. 15,000 voices covering for his missed notes, supporting his wavering melody, proving that when people sang together, nobody had to be perfect, because the collective sound was always beautiful. Maggie watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face, and felt her grandmother's presence as clearly as if Delphine were standing beside her. We did it, Grandma, Maggie thought. The seed bloomed. The story continued. The magic lived. The footage of Elon Musk's vulnerable performance went even more viral than the original 1977 concert. Within days, it had been viewed by over 1 billion people. Not because it was good. It wasn't. But because it was honest. CEOs around the world began admitting their struggles publicly. Leaders in every field started talking about mental health, about asking for help, about the loneliness that came with success. The cultural conversation shifted from celebrating perfection to celebrating authenticity. The Second Song Foundation expanded to 120 countries. They helped millions of people, not just trauma survivors, but anyone who'd forgotten their lyrics, anyone who'd hidden their broken places, anyone who needed permission to be imperfect and brilliant at the same time. Maggie continued leading the foundation until she was 75, when she finally retired and handed leadership to a young woman who'd found her voice after watching the 90s. Before she left, Maggie placed the photograph from Elvis's concert, the one that had lived on every desk she'd ever owned, in the foundation's headquarters, in a place of honor where every employee would see it daily. 4 people on a stage. Broken and beautiful. Scared and brave. Proof that forgetting your lyrics wasn't failure. It was your soul telling you to sing a different song. On August 16, 2027, 50 years exactly after the original concert, Maggie Chen died peacefully in her sleep, dreaming of yellow curtains and her grandmother's bakery, of front-row seats and scarred hands making music, of homeless boys finding homes and kings remembering how to be human. She died, knowing she'd kept her promise. The story didn't end with her death. It never would. Because the truth, Elvis, Franklin, Jasper and Delphine had proven that night in 1977, could never be unproven. Broken people make the most beautiful light. And somewhere, someone was watching the footage for the first time, learning that lesson, choosing courage over fear, stepping into the light despite their scars. writing the next chapter of a story that would never end as long as humans kept showing up for each other, kept singing, even when they forgot the words, kept believing that magic was real when people chose love over perfection. The miracle continued. Thank you so much for listening to this story about broken people making beautiful light. Now I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love knowing that this message of hope is reaching people everywhere. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us spread this message of kindness to more people who need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that reminds you that your scars don't make you broken, they make you beautiful. Before you go, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. It's another powerful story that will inspire you to keep showing up, keep being brave, and keep believing in magic. Remember, you're not alone. Keep singing your song, even when you forget the words. See you in the next story.